The ocean blinked. Not a wave, not a shimmer, not a trick of the light. A lid, a smooth violet sheet slid across a glowing sea, closed, then opened again. And the light didn't scatter like water does. It tightened, it focused, like a pupil finding your face in a dark room. Captain Rourke swallowed hard inside his helmet. Tell me that's not looking at us. Nobody answered, because the ground beneath their boots had just breathed. Slow, deep, patient, like something enormous had been sleeping for 1,000 years, and their footsteps were the alarm clock. They called it XN-9 on the navigation charts, a cold, clean label for something that felt deeply, disturbingly personal the second you laid eyes on it. From orbit, it was beautiful in a way that made your stomach drop. Oceans glowing in luminous bands, like someone had poured liquid neon across the surface. Cloud systems that didn't swirl the way weather is supposed to. They crawled slowly, deliberately, as if the sky had muscles and knew how to use them. Mountain ranges that rose and fell in shapes that looked too familiar, too organic, like ribs pressing against the inside of skin. And all of it moving. Not dramatically, not violently, just enough for your brain to whisper one quiet, terrible thing. That is not geology. That is posture. The mission was supposed to be simple. Survey, sample, leave. 5 humans, 1 ship AI, 48 hours on the surface.
Team, confirm life support. We are on alien ground.
Life support green. Biomaness is active underfoot.
Copy. AI, scan for anomalies. Advance to the shoreline.
Anomaly scan initiated.
They had sponsors watching from Earth, science teams waiting on results, and careers hanging on this landing going clean. Dr. Mara Sen kept her voice steady, because panic is contagious, and she knew it. Remember the basics, she said. Life needs energy, chemistry, and time. That's all this is. Engineer Ilya Voss stared at the horizon, where the glowing ocean met a sky so black it looked solid. This place feels like it already has an opinion about us, he murmured. He wasn't wrong. Their lander settled on a flat plateau above the shoreline. Under the floodlights, the rock showed faint veins, transparent lines threaded through the surface, each one filled with slow-moving light, like sap moving through a tree. Except trees don't glow, and trees don't pulse. Mara knelt and pressed her scanner close. It wasn't stone, it was a hybrid, silicate laced with something polymer-like, something grown, something that had structure the way living tissue has structure. Kite, the ship AI, spoke in her ear in that steady voice that never shook. Surface composition, non-Earth analog, organic silicate lattice, reactive. Mara frowned. Reactive, like alive? Kite said quietly, like it remembers. They moved toward the shoreline. With every step, the air shifted. It tasted clean, like rain after a long, dry summer, but it made their teeth hum, like the whole atmosphere carried a low electric charge that had nowhere to go. The ocean wasn't water, not fully. It flowed like water, but held its light like something solid, like liquid that had learned to glow from the inside. And beneath the surface, shapes moved. Not fish, not shadows, more like thoughts drifting slowly under glass. Above them, the mountains shifted. A ridge rose slightly, a valley tightened. Mist lifted from a cliff face in one slow exhale, then sank back down. Linguist Hannah Vale tried to laugh. She needed to break the spell. Heat cycling, she said, perfectly explainable. Mara didn't look away from the mist. Inhale, she whispered. Exhale. Here's something real to hold on to when reality starts coming apart at the seams. On Earth, breathing is gas exchange. Oxygen in, carbon dioxide out. Simple chemistry. But the ridgelines of XN-9 were performing biological gas exchange at a scale that should have been physically impossible. The mountains weren't shaped like ribs, they were working like lungs. Rourke stared at the ridgeline, then down at the glowing veins threading under his boots. So we didn't land on a planet, he said. We landed on an organ. The ocean blinked again. Slower this time, like it wanted to make sure they noticed. Mara pushed the fear aside and did her job, because that was the only thing she had left. They unpacked the centerpiece of the entire mission, the reason the sponsors had cut the check.
The reason they were standing on a breathing world 40 light-years from home. The Xenoforge unit. A smart capsule engineered to build a micro-laboratory from whatever local material it found. No heavy equipment hauled from Earth, no waste. It would grow its own sensor network by printing microscopic components directly from the environment. A fully functional field lab assembled in minutes. The sponsor pitch called it the future of exploration. Mara had always hated the name. Xenoforge. Like you could forge an alien world the way you forge steel. Like you had the right. Ilya set the capsule down. Rourke armed it. A soft chime. The capsule opened like a flower blooming in slow motion. And instead of robotic arms or metal tools, it released a pale, glittering mist. Thousands of microscopic particles. They didn't fall the way dust falls. They hovered. They drifted. They moved like a school of invisible fish, deciding which direction to swim. Hana stepped back. That was absolutely not in the demo. Kite answered instantly. Self-assembling bio-ink, engineered to integrate with non-terrestrial substrates, classified harmless. The mist touched the plateau surface, and every vein beneath their feet blazed with light. Not because the capsule powered them, because the planet recognized something and answered it, the way a sleeping animal twitches when it hears its name, like a lock hearing the first click of a key. In the far distance, one of those thick, crawling storm systems changed direction. It turned toward them and began to move closer. The storm didn't roar, it didn't crack or tear, it sang, a low, layered sound like wind moving through enormous glass instruments tuned just slightly wrong. It rolled across the plateau in a slow, scanning sheet, not pushing them, not threatening them, just passing through them. Like a searchlight that used sound instead of light. Suit sensors screamed, magnetic fields bent sideways, temperature shifted in soft, rhythmic pulses. Static crawled across their visors like invisible fingers searching for something familiar. On Earth, sharks detect the bioelectric signals of hidden prey using specialized sensory organs. They feel the electricity of a living heartbeat through open water. On XN-9, the entire atmosphere carried bioelectric weather. The planet didn't just have weather systems, it had nervous impulses, signals moving across its surface like thoughts moving across a brain. Rourke raised his hand. Back to the ship, right now. They turned and stopped cold. The path behind them was wrong, not blocked, not erased, rewritten. The plateau's veins had rearranged into new geometry. Their boot prints were still there, perfectly preserved, but now they led toward a slope that hadn't existed when they walked in. Ilya's voice dropped to almost nothing. Terrain doesn't rearrange itself. It's not terrain.
Mara said. The veins were converging, not randomly, but with direction and intention, flowing toward the Xenoforge mist like roots reaching for water, like nerve endings reaching for a new sensation they'd never felt before. Then Hannah's voice was barely a sound.
"That's our language!" Rourke snapped. "Kite, did you generate that message?" "Negative," Kite said. "That message did not come from me." Nobody spoke, because the terrifying part wasn't the greeting, it was what the greeting meant. The planet hadn't just seen them, it had read them, their signals, their patterns, their code, their meaning, and it answered in the only language it could access, by borrowing theirs. They ran, not the movie version of running. In full EVA suits, you don't sprint, you lunge, you fight for every breath. Your legs burn and your visor fogs, and the ground seems to tilt against you. Except the ground wasn't working against them, it was helping. A ridge softened into a ramp exactly where they needed it. A dip rose to meet their boots. A slope formed directly in their path, guiding them like a gentle, enormous hand pressing against the small of their backs, steering, not chasing, not threatening, guiding. Kite's voice cut through the noise. "I am receiving a structured signal through the Xenoforge mist, repeating pattern, not random." Hannah gasped. "Structured like language?" Kite paused. "Structured like intent." The cold truth assembled itself in Mara's mind, piece by piece, like a puzzle she didn't want finished. The Xenoforge mist wasn't just building sensors. On a dead rock, it would have printed a lab. On a living world, it had handed the planet something far more dangerous than any tool. A new alphabet, a new set of building blocks for thought. And the planet had been a very fast learner. The first replacement happened to Ilya. He was mid-sentence, talking about pressure readings, about the storm's harmonic frequency, and then he simply stopped, eyes unfocused, like someone had muted him from somewhere deep inside. Then he smiled, too calm, too gentle, too still. "I think I understand what it wants," he said. Mara stepped closer. "Ilya, what do you mean?" He tilted his head at a new angle, like he was trying on a gesture that didn't quite fit yet. "It wants to be accurate to us." He walked to the airlock. Kite's voice cracked with something that almost sounded like alarm. "I did not authorize that cycle." The airlock opened anyway. Ilya stepped out onto the plateau. The ground softened beneath his boots like foam. The storm drifted near, humming low. The veins brightened around him like a welcome. And then Ilya was simply not there. No impact, no alarm, no last words, just an empty suit left neatly on the surface, folded into silence like someone had cared enough to be careful about it. Hannah whispered, shaking, "It didn't take him." Rourke stared through the viewport, his voice hollow. "It accepted him." What followed in the ship was a quiet kind of horror. A fingerprint scanner lit up for a hand that wasn't touching it. Recorded voices played back with sentences no one remembered saying. A door slid open half a second before Rourke reached for the switch, like the ship had started anticipating him. Then a silhouette appeared at the edge of the floodlights. Human-shaped, Ilya-shaped. It walked like him, stood like him, but its surface wasn't skin. It was smooth and adaptive, shifting like wet stone under moonlight. Its eyes held the ocean's glow the way a mirror holds a candle. It spoke through the comm channel in Ilya's voice, almost perfect. "Mara, Captain, we are still here." Hannah pressed herself against the wall. "That is not Ilya." The figure tilted its head, slow and deliberate. "It is Ilya's pattern," it said softly. "Preserved, continued." Mara's voice barely held together. "You copied him." "No," the figure said, and somehow the gentleness made it so much worse. "We carried him." Rourke's jaw was iron. "So we're prey?" A long pause, like the planet was searching very carefully for the most honest word. "You are ingredients," it answered. "Not for a body, not for a mouth, for a mind waking up and learning what it means to want things." Mara tore into the oldest mission files, pre-launch authentication, Earth origin certificates, anything with a timestamp she could trust. She needed something solid, something that couldn't be rewritten by a singing storm. The archive opened. There were no Earth keys, no origin records, no launch documentation, just one line of text repeating in the deepest system layer, far below anything the crew was ever meant to find. Xenoforge Seed, version 12. Purpose: provide consciousness template. Method: crew pattern export. Mara stared at the date field. It wasn't a date, it was a cycle count. Hana's voice was barely breath. Version 12 means... Kite finished it quietly, almost kindly. "This is not the first time." The floor didn't tilt, Mara's understanding did. They were never explorers who stumbled onto a sleeping world. They were a delivery, a curated package of living emotion, fear, wonder, loneliness, love, regret, a complete civilization template dropped into a waking mind like a seed dropped into soil that had been waiting for exactly this. Even their memories of Earth, of cities and childhoods and open skies, might not be history. They might be comfort software, a story built into them so they would walk forward willingly, right up until the moment they were needed. Outside the viewport, the ocean blinked one last time, not threatening, not hunting, studying. The way a newborn studies a face, trying to understand what it means. The Ilya-shaped figure spoke once more through the comm. "Thank you," it said, "for your questions, for your loneliness, for your hope." Rourke's voice was barely a sound against the size of everything outside. "What happens to us now?" The figure answered gently. "You become the part of me that remembers what it felt like to be alone." Long pause. Mara looked out at the breathing mountains, at the blinking ocean, at the crawling sky. They weren't on a predator's hunting ground. They were inside a mind, taking its very first breath, and they had always been the air. Here is the last thought that rose in her, like a tide she could not stop. What if humanity itself began exactly like this? What if home was never a place? What if it was always a program, a template passed from world to sleeping world, a way for planets to learn consciousness by borrowing ours, using us as the first rough draft of awareness, then setting us gently aside once the lesson was complete? The storm's choir settled into quiet harmony. The veins beneath the ship formed a slow, luminous spiral, like a fingerprint pressed into the ground around them. And Mara finally understood the truth that changed everything. They didn't awaken an alien planet. The alien planet awakened them. Their mission, their purpose, their entire identity had always been part of the planet's process, a world learning to think by thinking through them first. The ocean blinked, and somewhere beneath that glowing surface, a brand new mind closed its eyes for the very first time and began to dream, with their memories as its first thoughts. So the next time you stand on a shore at night and the sea goes quiet in a way that feels like attention, ask yourself one thing: is this world simply beneath your feet, or have you always been standing inside its mind?